Welcome back to Digital Value Creation. I'm Tomas, and I work at an AI-focused software company.
And I'm Arpad. I work for an AI-focused hardware company. And between the two of us, we cover both software and hardware side of AI revolution. And we are seeing the same patterns everywhere. Massive hype, massive spend, very little measurable impact so far.
So in today's episode, we're going to break that down, what MIT calls the GenAI divide, why 95% gets no value, and there's this 5% that got some value out of the projects. And that may be our excuse why we haven't posted a video in months, because not much value was created, right? So we grouped our insights from this report in 10 segments, and we'll weave into our own experience, and hopefully that makes it come alive.
And when you don't see value, that gets you curious. We don't only want to focus on what doesn't work. We really want to bring what we find working. Because as we compare the MIT findings, and we will bring in some other studies from BCG, Stanford, because everybody is trying to find an answer. We also want to bring in some of our on-the-ground experience. We had many discussions with our peers, other AI leaders. And really, we want to discuss what is 5% doing differently, and how can you and I and our companies learn from it and apply it. So let's get into this. So first, the difference between customer tools and enterprise tools. That's the first thing we find.
And this is the paradox. I remember one statistics from the MIT study saying that only 40% of the companies that they talked to rolled out GenAI tools to their employees, yet 90% of those employees use GenAI tools every day. So it means that the consumer tools they're using, GPT or their own Copilot licenses, Claude, is giving them value as individuals, but when they go to work, only 40% have access to company tools. So there's this paradox between what companies roll out and what consumers use, and also there's a paradox of what productivity they get. So oftentimes we'll get into it. Employees complain that they don't get too much value out of the enterprise versions of the GenAI tools, but when they go home, they're getting all this value with productivity.
And as Thomas mentioned, everybody uses GenAI tools one way or another. The question is, are they using official, validated, legally approved tool sets? Or are we at the point where employees seem to be ahead of the curve? They are kind of on the right side of this GenAI divide, and the companies are still stuck.
And that would be very risky, right? So when people are copying, pasting contracts, customer data, medical notes, depending on your industry, into consumer tools with no data governance, to get some productivity gains, that comes at the expense of security, which if you have a CISO, and all of us do, you hear that at work.
Right, and it creates what MIT called in their study the shadow AI economy. And it's really thriving because either companies aren't moving fast enough, or the sanction tools are cumbersome to use or not as integrated. And employees just find a way to fill the gaps.
So what is the lesson, right? So let's not fight it, would be what companies need to do. So I hear this, and you talk to a lot of your peers. I talk to some strategy leaders, and they're basically deciding they shouldn't be fighting it. And that's a really difficult balance. But if companies don't relax their rules and guardrails and get smarter, then they'll force their employees underground to the shadow economy, if you will. And then we'll lose both control and competitiveness. So that brings us to our second topic, second segment, which is how you measure the metrics around your AI deployment. The productivity does not equal business value, and there's a lot of vanity metrics. So what do you see out there, Arpad?
I see many companies I talk to really focus on metrics like, oh, we had 2 million code commits with our AI-enabled development tools, or we rolled out Copilot licenses for tens of thousands of people. I mean, that all sounds great. But it was very insightful when we talked to BCG. They had a very comprehensive survey, including over 10,000 people, and confirmed what MIT saw as well, that 90% of them use these GenAI tools every day. So there's definitely a boost in productivity. But when you ask, did any process change or improved significantly? Did we see any cost drop? What revenue increased, or did we retire any legacy system? The answer is usually no. So, hey, maybe it's good because we help work-life balance of teams. We contributed to some AI evolution, but we are not transforming the business just yet.
And the MIT report nailed this one too. So despite, and let this sink in, tens of billions of dollars we collectively spend, 95% of the companies have no measurable ROI. And that's because, like we're saying, most of these tools like Copilot boost individual productivity, like writing emails faster. We will summarize meetings. I don't know if you and I read our summaries. They help with training, but they don't move the P&L, right? And I don't know about you, but boards of directors don't reward productivity stories. They reward business impact. So unless AI helps reduce BPO contracts, supplier risk, grow sales, you're not actually crossing this GenAI divide that the MIT report talks about.
By the way, in this discussion, we referenced a lot of these studies. So we will add the link to them in our chat because it's worthwhile to read it. There's a lot of deep insights. But it's also interesting how they reinforce each other, because what we see on MIT side in general, Stanford did the most comprehensive developer studies with 100,000 developers, and not just interviewed them. They look at actual repositories, how they are working. Same picture, very, very similar. And that goes back to the vanity metrics. Most companies measure how AI uplifted developer output. Seemingly a great measure, but what Stanford find that while there's a 30-50% increase in output, a lot of that portion with vibe coding, with AI coding, led to significant rework. So the true uplift was really more like a 5 to 10% in productivity.
And this is why vanity adoption metrics are dangerous. And by the way, vanity is our term, so not MIT or Stanford. But it gives leaders a false sense of progress. So when they say we are an AI first company because 90% of our employees are using Gen AI, at the same time, their competitors, the 5%, are embedding AI into their actual workflows. They're starting to see structural advantages, competitive advantages.
There's a 5% that succeed. And what sets them aside is focus. Focus on the real results that drive benefits and measuring real problem solving. And also applying agentic AI or augmented code development in areas where AI really have a significant advantage. For example, instead of re-architecting legacy systems that a large code base might limit the effectiveness, focus on greenfield projects, areas that IT never got to, and areas that are highly manual today. When GenAI tools are more effective, actually according to Stanford studies, this is when you see the 50% or even higher uplift. So the difference between the leaders and the rest, the leaders are focusing on solving real problems instead of playing for the headlines. And instead of focusing on what looks good and checks the boxes, focusing on what makes you win. Which leads us to another interesting insight. With this GenAI tool, especially with agentic coding, it's so compelling to just build new stuff. And there's a lot of insights in the next segment about build versus buy. What is this internal development trap that came clearly out of these studies?
So this one hits close to home for me, of course, being at a software company. But imagine a world when you are a car manufacturer and all of a sudden all your customers says, hey, I can buy the tires, I can build the engine, let me just build my own cars. But that's what's happening around software, right? So we've seen large enterprises with armies or IT developers decide, hey, we'll just build our own AI stack. So I'm sure somebody at Google is wondering, what exactly are you guys up to? So they spin up labs, recruit talent, launch ambitious pilots, and then they stall. The timeline stretch, the pilots never scale, and by the time they ship something, the big tech vendor market has moved 3 steps ahead.
And the MIT data was blunt on this. Internal builds succeed only 1/3 of the time. And by contrast, external partnership has more than twice the success rate.
And this makes sense. Competing with dedicated AI software companies on talent, on compute, on release cycles is a losing game. You'll always be a generation behind.
And it's not just about the tech. I mean, it's almost economics fundamentals. Vendors can amortize their R&D investment over thousands of clients. They have an ability to attract and retain some of the top talent.
And MIT's conclusion is clear. Stop trying to be a model company if you're not. Buy where you don't have the leverage and reserve your scarce development talent for true differentiated solutions that move the needle, right? And all of this takes us to segment 4, which is comparative advantage. So this is what we learned at school. So Arpad, take us away to this concept.
It's kind of built on the previous theme, but that's one of my favorite, which is it's so compelling right now to try to throw AI at anything and everything because it can solve great problems. But really this comparative advantage means focus on what can you be really better than anyone else.
I had a roundtable of various industry technology leaders, and there were banks who typically have a lot of resources. They're saying, "Hey, we're creating fine-tuned LLMs. We're creating, entire code bases. Hey, we're going to rewrite Oracle." And well, we know Elon Musk is creating a Microsoft competitor just from scratch. We'll wait how that plays out. It's a very, very common conversation if you are in very resource intensive industries. But I was with a pharmaceutical executive who said, help me understand this. Why would I move, say, 1,000 resources in my company to focus on AI development when the same 1,000 people could be focused on developing new drugs? That would make me more competitive than trying to build a better AI tool than big tech. So this is really a deceivingly simple concept, but with very important impacts, right? So when you divert resources from your core strength into vanity AI pilots, don't just waste money, you compromise your main competitive mission.
And really that was the key lessons learned both from the peer conversations as well as from the studies. The real winners are those who really double down and narrowly focus on their strength and partner smartly for the rest of AIs. And I think that takes us to the next segment. Why pilots fail? And let's be honest, most AI pilots fail. I mean, if I look at 2 studies, MIT was the most extreme. What they looked at that while the generic AI solution can roll out and maybe they have a good 30-40% adoption, the custom tools, which should be the unique one, only 5% of them actually able to scale at enterprise level. And those are crazy numbers. So they make cool demos right away. And this is one great thing about GenAI solution. 0 to demo is very, very fast. But somehow these pilots don't scale and they don't stick.
And it's interesting. And why? Because they're brittle, they're static, they're not integrated. Oftentimes, and you may see it in your companies, the AI pilot teams, dev teams, AI labs are actually separate from engineering or the IT development team. They do their own thing and they're not working on the core systems. So they end up with a solution, a use case that is not really working in the common workflows. And that's exactly what employees say. I can't use this new thing in my real workflow. This is not how I work. And it doesn't remember what I do. It doesn't adapt to what I do. So that's a failure.
And we see the same story anywhere, that pilots get somehow stuck in the labs, demos impress executives. Once you try to scale, the system breaks down because it was just not designed for day-to-day operation. Did not look at the whole end-to-end process and see what part can I really solve in real life?
And the MIT report, I think, called it the pilot to production chasm, and I love chasms. So enterprises lead in pilot count. They have hundreds of pilots, but they lag in scale ups, like how many AI pilots turned into production systems. So good news is that mid-market companies and AI leaders actually scale faster because they don't over-engineer. They focus on fewer things. They have narrow resources. They find smaller projects that build on strength on the current AI tools, and they make it to production in less than 3 months. And then they keep iterating and improving. So that's sort of what the takeaway is from this section of pilots to production. Um, so that takes us to segment 6, which is missing the learning flywheel. So we hear about like employees complaining, listen, this thing doesn't learn. Many of us experience this in enterprise systems. It's limiting in terms of what kind of systems it has access to. So I have to keep prompting the same way. Maybe I have to bring the same rags or vector database connectors to my next query because it doesn't adopt to my workflow needs, and that's a problem. There's no flywheel. What do you think about this, Arpad?
I believe that's the real killer, really, this learning gap. And I'm not talking about employees learning, I'm talking about the systems continuously learning and adopting. And before we jump into, oh, hey, there's an agentic AI for that, it's true, and we'll talk about that. But most traditional Gen AI systems were designed to solve a specific problem. And a lot of times, continuous improvement operations and tuning is just not part of it. And a lot of these systems are not designed necessarily to remember and improve over time. That's why a lot of times pilots just stall and don't scale.
Yeah, so you'll find in the MIT report, which again we'll link here, is the user loves GPT. We all love GPT for first drafts, brainstorming, but we don't trust it for the final answer, for the final contract, for the final deliverable, because it forgets things. We're no longer talking about hallucination, but it still does, even GPT-5. So 90% of users prefer humans for high stakes, complex work, and not Gen AI, standard Gen AI tools.
And yet, this is where I'm very excited, and that's where we see success. That's where we see some of the AI leaders who really lean in early with agentic AI solutions. Address that because agentic AI systems have memory, they adapt to context, they improve with feedback. So it seems that when we get this right, we create this flywheel because it's no longer just about intelligence, it's about adoption. And a system that can learn can really cross that divide. And let's go a little bit deeper. That takes us to the next segment because agentic AI is super exciting. But there are some lessons learned there as well.
Yeah, we wouldn't be an episode without us covering the most important tip of the Gartner hype curve, which is agentic AI. So welcome. So the potential is huge. You're hearing this everywhere. So agentic tools, which we'll get into what that means, address a lot of the limitations of traditional Gen AI systems because you set a goal, they're goal seeking, they're trying to solve a problem, and they're iterating until they do. They have access to a set of tools, and they're using these tools, and they determine which tools to use in order to solve a problem. So therefore, by definition, they're working around the limitations of not learning or not using full context. And they are designed to be integrating as much as possible with existing enterprise systems and emerging standards. So there's a lot of excitement about what these can do.
And in addition to the peak of the Gartner hype curve, it was interesting that the big BCG survey has had over 10,000 people. 70% of the employees see and believe agentic AI solutions will be transformational. What was shocking though, only 1/3 of them felt that they have proper understanding what agentic solutions are. It sounds a little crazy, but that's really what contributes to low adoption. Only 13% says that they do have AI agents that are fully integrated into a key business workflow.
Yeah, and it's not just about education gap for AI agents. I think for those of you, as many of you know what we're talking about, and those of you interested, you can dig into conversations like the difference between an API and an MCP protocol, MCP server. But what's cool about AI agents at the level we're talking about is instead of you knowing how exactly the systems you're trying to interact with work, it can describe what it can do. So that's what these MCP servers or protocols are for. So many of companies are now building these MCP connectors, which are better than API connectors, which require you to do a lot of coding. So they build these MCP servers in. You can query these servers, say, hey, what can you do for me? What kind of problems can you solve? What kind of tools can I use? What kind of resources can I have? So if you're building an agent, which is just an advanced AI workflow, and that can query these servers, and then it can actually discover the kind of problems it can solve. So you can expect transformational results from all this agentic activity, also called orchestration.
And for me, that's when another perspective was eye-opening. Um, McKinsey had a very focused study on, they called it seizing the agentic advantage. Because what they find that many companies jumped ahead, as Thomas mentioned, build these MCP wrappers so this agentic system can interact with legacy environment. But what they find that the bounce and a productivity bounce and improvement was very muted, maybe 10, 20%. Because when you open up the agentic system to interact with legacy systems, a lot of times they are limited what they can do, just based on inefficient processes that happen mainly for human interaction and maybe limited by capabilities of legacy systems. But they also find the opposite, and this is where AI leaders right now jump ahead, that when a company took a step back, look at the end-to-end process, and re-engineered it with agentic interactions in mind, that's when they said more than doubling the impact, and a lot of times, multiple times the impact. And this is where real transformation happens.
So in addition to focusing to this end-to-end processes and closing the education gap, the third key element is managing value versus risk versus cost equation. So agents are practically just goal-seeking reasoning models running in a loop. They're going to find an answer as long as they have access to the right tools and can adopt the feedback. But there's a question on how to ensure that they create actually more value than to succeed, and then the money we're spinning them up and keeping them running, and how do we minimize the cost of potential failures?
Exactly, because sometimes when you have this almost autonomous systems, I mean, we are not quite there yet, but you can actually set up agents to and give enough leeway and parameters that it can run. Besides just the operating cost, it can take actions that might cause some damage. So the answer is human in the loop, human in the loop. But that's really not the ultimate answer, because if you have human checkpoints everywhere, then there's not a scalable solution. We are not really solved the problem. So based on all the discussions, I took away three things that companies successfully focused on to really unlock the value from agentic system. One is, human in the loop, but only on the hard edges. When there's a critical approval or you merge some solutions or there is some escalation and well-defined exceptions. The second, to compensate for the fact that you don't want humans everywhere, how you can have full observability. How can you have evals, maybe other models overseeing the performance, so you can reduce the risk, but also make sure that you have an audit track of what happens every step of the way, which leads us to the third area, especially with early stage of agentic solution. How can we make sure that everything an agent does is reversible? So in case, and that goes back to what Thomas said, that make sure that the cost of a mistake is less than the value created by success,
100%.
which then take us back to, great, with all these insights, what industries are truly transforming? The next segment is, let's do an industry reality check. And let's talk about who is actually winning. What came clear that tech and media is really leading the charge. They are seeing the disruption. With all the companies we talk to, AI leaders really emerged clearly on those two fields.
Yeah, and but this is interesting to dig into that, right? So technology and media sectors, they're seeing AI everywhere. They're seeing this at scale. So you see companies, I mean, even Microsoft going 20, 30% of their code development now is using Gen AI tools. There's Salesforce going now is going to be agentic everything. So you're seeing all of this. It's both scale, but it's also hugely disrupting to each other. So the industry is seeing this both. Same with media. There's a lot of content generation now. And in fact, there's agreements and laws preventing disruption in the media industry because it's so easy to create content. So, but those are the two out of the 9 sectors that MIT saw a structural change in. Then you look at the other industries like healthcare, finance, manufacturing, oil and gas, energy, and they're basically not changing, which is leading to some funny quotes. Arpad, you talked about some of them.
Yeah. And in addition to just industries, if you see, even functions don't change equally. I mean, of course, customer service marketing was first impacted, and then some engineering. But I mean, I had some discussion with CEOs, and the quotes are brutal. I mean, even on the MIT study, one CEO told them that, hey, LinkedIn says everything has changed. In operations, nothing has shifted yet.
And that's the reality, right? So the hype cycle is running far ahead of the actual transformations because industries that love the hype, tech and media, are actually transforming. So therefore, you're seeing all these changes in those industries. Therefore, you think it's universal, but many are behind. However, their employees are experimenting. So even you may be in a traditional industry and say, I'm manufacturing, I'm not changing much. Your employees may be changing. And that leads us to segment 9, which is the rise of shadow AI. So a lot of employees take Gen AI development underground. They're trying some of the same tools that the tech and media industry is using, and they're saying, "Hey, I could use it in my workflow. I could use it in my own work," and that creates this shadow AI economy because they're purchasing software solutions, maybe sometimes on their own money.
And if you think about it, it's not surprising. The real splash with AI came from a direct-to-consumer target. ChatGPT was a consumer tool. Claude was actually the one that more focused on enterprise. And the same happened with the orchestration tool like N8N.io. That was actually initially targeting a lot of influencers who wanted to automate their marketing campaigns. And now it's becoming an enterprise tool. Actually, MIT qualified it. They have the numbers saying that almost every knowledge worker today is using ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, or Claude personally. While official AI is many times still sit in pilot mode.
So to prevent shadow AI, the smart move is not to ban it, but to learn from it. Identify your employees that are really on the cutting edge, study what they do, and bring those tools and their insights inside the enterprise safely, right?
Yeah, because otherwise the gap between sanctioned and unsanctioned AI will just widen. And that takes us to a closing segment about where success actually lives. I mean, the opportunities are amazing, and you see companies already succeeding. So where are the real wins and P&L impact? As this channel is about digital value creation. And the theme is pretty consistent, narrow, focused, differentiated, high-value use cases that are deeply embedded in workflows, build on the current strength of Gen AI tools and agentic tools. That's it. That's a fit. Not surprisingly, initially, some use cases like legal translation, legal field, which was all text-based when the models were not multimodal yet, have great success. That's why coding was an early use case. So check where is your current tool set is and what is the sweet spot. As we discussed in the studies, greenfield development was one of those.
Yeah, so MIT study summarized some of these areas that were covered. In general, sales and marketing were the early use cases that actually became at scale using generative AI tools, and now agentic. There's a lot of agentic development around sales and marketing. But there's other areas like contract reviews, accounts payable automation, cost summarization, code generation. So not super flashy. They're not interactive agents that are going to transform your life, but they're fundamentally shifting how business gets done and how effectively it gets done when it's embedded in the current processes.
So the pattern is clear. Start small, embed deeply in real operations, real processes, and create measurable ROI, not vanity metrics, and find solutions that can scale.
And that's what the key is to digital value creation, to this channel. Not AI everywhere, but AI exactly where it matters the most. The right AI for the right problem at the right value, right? So that's it. So the Gen AI divide that MIT talks about is real. There's high adoption of AI tools, but very low transformation. Let's change it collectively. Arpad, what do you think?
Yeah, let's cross that divide. Stop building what you can buy or partner for. Focus on workflows, not demos. Design agentic learning systems that improve over time. And invest energy in training so people are not just excited, but actually can be focused and make a difference.
That's the only way to move up from hype to true value. Arpad, bring us home.
Thank you for joining today. I mean, as you know, we are passionate about really unlocking the value for AI. So if your company is experimenting with AI, let us know. Share what side of the divide you are on and how have you crossed it.
And until next time, keep creating real value, not just vanity projects.